All right. So I'm going to be talking with you today. We're going to start off with the history of identification cards in general and go through an overview about influential corporations, how identification cards and driver's licenses became and how they ended, how they are today. We're going to talk about the Real ID Act, which is a very controversial subject, especially today, especially amongst the presidential candidates. We're going to talk a little bit about amateur ID manufacturing, and I'm going to try to do a quick demo. I was going to kind of like take someone from the audience and make them a new identification. I was actually going to give out new identifications for everybody, but I figured we'd have like a little bit of a problem if I did that. So what ended up happening is my printer that I took with me, the ink exploded on the airplane. So unfortunately, I made a quick printout. You can see here, it's in pretty bad shape. Well, maybe you can't see, but it's in pretty bad shape, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And then we'll conclude with some high-tech ID concepts that hopefully you'll be seeing in the future. This is an overview of what we'll be discussing during the history of identification cards. We're going to talk about fake IDs, valid government uses, and influential corporations. So identification cards started off with driver's licenses, basically with the automobile. And this happened in Germany and France in the 1900s and quickly became adopted in the United States around 1910. And as more and more people began driving, kind of became the de facto form of identification, throughout the world. The inherent flaw with the whole system is that they were never designed to be identification cards, and that problem still exists today. So, and you can't really go about your day-to-day basis without a proper form of identification. And I'd like to hear a story of anyone that doesn't have identification, government-issued identification that lives a normal life. So. In New York City, do you leave the city? Probably not.
And even in the city, a lot of things can't be done. Try to open a bank account without the proper.
Exactly.
It's almost doing it with post 9/11, almost impossible.
Right.
It's obvious.
So
it's very hard now.
there are uses for identification, and it does do things like protect your privacy. It proves you are you. And that's good. You don't want other people assuming your identity. So, and like we just discussed, it makes things like travel, work, and purchasing possible. A problem we see in many foreign countries is you can be stopped and harassed. You have to have your identification documents on hand wherever you go, and not having these documents could be detrimental. And this is an emerging problem in the U.S. We currently don't have this problem, but especially post 9/11. As someone just mentioned, we've been seeing this as a problem we need to address and prevent. So we have been seeing fraudulent identification cards and penalties increasing, and this is mainly due to increased concerns with illegal immigration. Many of the what I believe has been scapegoats to the increased penalties have been in response to 9/11, the enhanced concerns with terrorists obtaining realistic identification cards. If you're familiar with the terrorists obtaining identification cards during 9/11, they actually obtained legitimate documents through legitimate channels. They submitted fraudulent information through their local DPS or Department of Transportation. And, I don't think this is a good response to this type of activity, because if you're a terrorist and you're about to commit like some type of mass crime towards society, you're not going to worry that the penalty towards your driver's license just went from a Class C to a Class A misdemeanor when you're about to kill a few hundred people. So, and then there's the increased worries about underage drinking, and I personally don't think this is a very good way to solve this problem. People are going to drink if they want to drink. obtaining a fraudulent identification has never been a problem. There's online retailers, and every once in a while the government will shut down an online retailer, and a new one will pop up within the next week. And those documents are pretty high quality. They're based overseas. Many of them are based in Canada. The laws in Canada are a way so that if you can't prove that a fake identification card is being used for illegal activity, then you can manufacture them. And we see this in British Columbia mainly. There's illegal identification card shops around town. You go in, you get your picture taken, and the identification cards look surprisingly similar to real identification cards or government-issued cards. There's fake ID rings, which mainly target the illegal immigration and illegal immigrants, and we see those getting shut down on a very large-scale basis because they're usually pretty open with their techniques. And then the biggest problem that we see that should not be a problem by any means and should be addressed immediately is the obtaining fraudulent identification cards through legitimate channels. So that's assuming the identity of a dead neighbor or a relative, and submitting these applications to your local Department of Transportation or DPS. A problem we probably won't ever be able to address is corrupt government employees, and there will be means to suppress this behavior, but it's something that will probably always be a problem. I've seen government employees charging upwards to $10,000 for a single driver's license, and with that kind of cash involved, you won't see that being stopped anytime soon. So this is a chart identifying how you would obtain a driver's license or identification card through your local Department of Transportation DPS. And none of this information is new. I imagine everyone's been through this process at least 10 times. If you don't have a Social Security number, a Social Security card, you apply for that through your Social Security Administration. If you're assuming the identity of another person, there's ways to get this card by presenting fraudulent information. And again, the same way through the Vital Records Office, getting birth certificates. So the point is that when you actually apply to the Department of Transportation, you can present illegitimate documents and obtain a authentic document with fraudulent information on it, your face and information. Now, the problem we see with most states in the United States is they do not validate the information with the breeder documents, or what they're called. The breeder documents are known as your Social Security card or your birth certificate. And they do not validate these documents with the Vital Records Office or the Social Security Administration. So they have no proof that you are who you are. What will happen is, what the states will do is they'll issue an identification card, and 6 months later they'll realize they issued someone an identification card that wasn't actually them. And by then it's too late because the person already has the card. So some influential organizations, we have Digimarc Corporation, which is like the Microsoft of the identification card industry, and they make about 2/3 of the US driver's licenses, which is a huge number. They're most likely going to make billions of dollars off the Real ID Act, and we'll go on to discuss that in a minute. They make 60 million identification documents per year, and they produce identification documents for over 25 countries, including both border countries, Canada and Mexico. So they pretty much own most of the world's industry. There's L1, I'm not too familiar with this company, and they produce somewhere between 1/3 of the rest of the US driver's licenses. Now, if you go to your DPS or Department of Transportation office and they give you a driver's license on site right after getting your picture taken, then that means that the state individually produces their own driver's license. And these documents are usually the least secure and easily to reproduce illegally. There's the AAMVA, which is my favorite government organization, mainly because of the acronym. It stands for American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. Say that 10 times fast. It'll when the Real ID Act is implemented, it'll be kind of the main coordinator between the states. These are some of the other major players in the formulation of the Real ID Act, and these organizations will, be mainly affected by the act. So, you can pick your favorite acronym from the list. So, on to the Real ID Act. We're going to talk about the purpose, its legislative history, the outline standards and requirements, and the most interesting part is the controversy. So, its original purpose was to establish new standards for state-issued driver's licenses so that they can be used for federal purposes. And then the Department of Homeland Security said these federal purposes were to, for citizens, boarding commercially operated airline flights, entering federal buildings, and nuclear power plants. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to be pretty upset if my ID won't let me get into, nuclear power plants when the time comes. So basically what's going to happen is if your ID isn't Real ID compliant and your state's not enrolled in the program when the time comes, you're not going to be able to fly. And federal buildings, they're talking about post offices and courthouses, federal courthouses, and things like that. And I don't know how strict they are going to be with that, making the, I don't know, they're going to extend the time that you wait in the post office so they can, accept IDs. Sounds pretty ridiculous. Additionally, curbing fraud and other identification-related crimes, and most of all, the entire system is related around preventing illegal aliens from obtaining any federally recognized identification. Now, this is one of the main issues that we're seeing here. So, illegal aliens aren't going to be able to fly, send mail, go to court. It's going to be a big deal. And there's a lot of opponents to this issue and a lot of proponents to this issue. So Representative James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin attached it to the Emergency Supplemental Appropriations Act for Defense, Global War on Terror, and Tsunami Relief, and it's a military spending bill. No Senate committee hearings were actually delivered on the Real ID Act itself, so no discussion was ever conducted upon it, and it was basically just attached to this must-pass bill. That happened in 2005, and after a few delays, as you'll see on this next slide, what will happen is in 2011, all states must be enrolled in the program. This slide is really confusing. I always have trouble explaining it, but basically phase 1 and phase 2, there was like a bunch of problems, and then there were some delays. And then, so by 2011, the states must be enrolled in the program. Between 2011 and 2014, all citizens issued new identification cards under the age of 50 must have Real ID Act compliant identification cards or driver's licenses. Now, this doesn't mean that if your ID that you currently have doesn't expire until 2014, you'll still be able to use it. So, but after 2014, if your ID is not Real Act compliant, then you won't be able to fly, enter a government building. And then the same thing goes for citizens over the age of 50 until 2017. So the outline standards and requirements for the Real ID Act aren't much different than what the current standards are in most states, and this is kind of unfortunate. The things that are different are the fact that all databases from every Department of Transportation or DPS office in the United States must be linked together. So if someone applies for a driver's license in Texas, then in California, the Texas office will be to say, well, you already have a driver's license issued in California. Would you like us to make that inactive? And you'll say, well, no, I still live in California. I come to Texas in the summer, and they'll say, well, sorry, I can't issue 2 driver's licenses, And this is going to be a big problem because, the weakest link in the chain is going to be the thing that compromises the whole system. So if there's a security issue in Texas, and then someone might be able to have access to the entire system and everybody's driver's license or identification card information. Now, the data retention and storage outlines require that everybody's information be held on file for 15 years, meaning they'll scan in your photo they'll scan your photo or non-photo ID onto file and your birth certificate, including your documentation of legal status, and they'll keep that on file for up to 15 years. So, and they'll include that in the database that will be accessed by every state. And most important of all, they will begin to validate breeder documents with the Social Security Administration and the other office that validates like birth certificates. Forgot that was called. Anyways, their data requirements, this has also been a big issue. Included in every card must have a common machine-readable technology. So although every state may issue different cards with different designs, they all must have the same type of machine-readable technology, whether it be RFID or 2D barcode, or 3D barcode. Was it 2D or 3D? 3D? Okay. And it must include the full name, the date of birth, the gender, the driver's license, and a digital photograph and signature. So this is basically all your information. I'm surprised it doesn't include your social security number as well. And otherwise, the cards are no different than the current standards. And this is very disturbing because while talking with people in the industry doing research for this project, I was talking with, the number one reason the Homeland Security and James Sensenbrenner introduced this bill was so we could have a new identification document that was high security, unable to reproduce, basically a new document that could not be fraudulently remanufactured. And what ended up happening was large stakeholders in the industry said, well, if we use this new technology that you are proposing, then all of our technologies are going to become obsolete, and we're going to lose huge amounts of money. But that's not how they communicated to the AAMVA and the other governmental organizations. They lobbied for their technologies, saying that their technologies were better, even though we've been fraudulently manufacturing their technologies for tens of years now. So what ended up happening is in the Real ID Act, they deleted all the requirements for a high security document and left them the way they are now. So now we have a less secure document and a bunch of other rules that may or may not make the system more secure. So it's really unfortunate that that had to happen. So now we have some controversy. We can see that many people, don't like this act at all. We have Barack Obama totally opposes it. Hillary Clinton wanted the law to be reviewed, whatever that means. Even Mike Huckabee said the law was a huge mistake. The ACLU says the Real ID Act would be abused by the private sector. And when they say this, they mean that the ID Act, when the common machine-readable technology that was going to be included in every ID could be abused by the private sector in a way that everywhere you go and every time you use your identification card, all your information can be stored. This can be your purchasing habits, your whereabouts, and people can start collecting data on you. And they say, this is a terrible idea. This is the beginning of the end, what they usually say, blah, blah, blah. And even many conservative groups, like the Gun Owners of America, oppose the act. They say, well, if something like this happens, then felons in other states won't be able to buy guns in our states, which is probably a good thing, right? Whatever. Eliot Spitzer backed the Real ID Act, but also wanted to give all illegal immigrants the right to vote, so he's also pretty confused. But he represented a really good point. He wanted to treat driver's licenses independently from federally issued IDs. He wanted to give all citizens the right to drive for public safety reasons. He said these two things should be totally separate, and we shouldn't be bringing them together. This has been a problem since the beginning of time. Why are we continuing the problem? And many other states have adopted that idea as well, and they've begun to give all inhabitants of their states driver's licenses, although they're not federally recognized identification cards. So even though they have the right to drive in those states, they don't have the right to all the federal rights that the other citizens have by having this enhanced driver's license. So this act was completely unfunded, and many states are pissed. We already talked about the commercial issues and the privacy issues. And then we have the public safety issues, which many states aren't allowing their illegal aliens to drive, which, I mean, is understandable. And this is a totally other topic. You know, we could talk for another 12 hours about, you know, immigration and illegal aliens. So I made this slide, and then I didn't put a key on it, and then I came back later and like had no idea what it meant. So I still don't know what the gray states mean, and I apologize. I don't even know what half the gray states are, actually. So we have California and Alabama are like gung-ho, you know, they're ready to comply. Real ID Act all the way. We have the yellow states, which have actually passed legislation saying we're not going to comply with certain parts of the Real ID Act if it kills us. And they're all financial reasons. The only state that speaks out against one of the only states that speaks out against the Real ID Act for reasons other than financial reasons is Utah. And they say, you know, this is a major act against our privacy. And they're probably using that as an excuse because they don't want to pay the money. But still, they're taking a step forward that none of the other states were taking. And then we have the confused states like North Dakota, Illinois, and Michigan. Thank you. Michigan? Oh, yeah, sorry about that. See, I told you I'm not. And they've spoken out again. They've publicly spoken out against the act, but they've unwillingly began to follow anyways. Yeah. All right, so now something a little more exciting. Okay, so manufacturing at home. We're going to talk about the needed equipment, needed materials, a little bit about the manufacturing processes and the advanced production methods. So if you haven't already downloaded this guide, I recommend doing it now. Okay, it's .pdf, sorry. And what I'm doing here, I'm going to do the most simplest ID reproduction method that I have listed in the guide. And it's the quickest and easiest to reproduce. And outlined in the guide are other methods as well that are much more expensive. And you know, if you have questions about that, we can talk about those one-on-one or later via email or however you choose. So why manufacture at home? You can produce high-quality documents for your organization, small business, or club. You can protect your privacy. You're creating another identification, which is not illegal. You know, if you want to start a small identification cart manufacturing or consulting business, which is something that I've kind of taken the path of, and then you can produce other quality documents with these exact same techniques for the fraction of the cost. If you were to produce some of the documents that I'm about to show you through through another retailer, you're going to be paying, you know, upwards to $10 a document. We're going to make them for like 50 cents a document. You know, so it's easy to do and it's a lot of fun and it's really interesting and I'm totally obsessed with it. So obviously, you should never produce documents that are similar to government documents. And for example, I'll show you a picture. This is my driver's license. Yeah. And this is my membership card for Lock Sport International. And there's many differences between the two cards. But you can see there's enough differences between these two cards that I would never get in trouble, for having a document that looks like a government document. So what you need a compatible. You need a compatible inkjet printer, a laminator, a die cutter, which we see here on the left. I don't know if anyone can see that. We'll probably be able to see when the lights go back on. A magnetic stripe encoder for encoding the stripe on the back of the card if you choose to use that technology. Custom rubber stamps for reproducing the hologram. A black light for admiring your work at the end. You need a scanner for scanning in images or making your personal template. A signature pad for writing signatures directly to the card. Photoshop, of course, and most of this material can be purchased at brainstormidsupply.com, and this is my favorite site where I purchase most of my materials from. And then that was all the equipment. Now the materials we'll talk about a little more detail. The laser Teslin. Now this is synthetic paper. It's called polythin. It's a very porous plastic paper. I have some up here. It just looks like normal paper, but it's very thick. It's opaque, and it's just another little fact. It's biodegradable, and it has superior adhesion qualities, meaning that it can adhere to the laminate material. Now, normal like laser paper or stock paper does not adhere to laminate, and this material will adhere directly to the laminate, and that's why it makes it superior for this application. We have Pearl X pigment powders, which are perfect for making holograms. And what this powder does is that at an angle you can see the powder, but when you look directly onto it, you can't see the powder. So it's perfect for holograms. Right, the site is disabled, and that's why I included the site owner's email address directly below it, and he did give permission to release his email address. So he might take like 3 or 4 months to get back to you, but it's really the only place you can buy a lot of this equipment at, a lot of this materials at. So in the actual guide, it has his website next to each individual material, so you know where everything is from. And then transparent base. Now, when we're making the actual holographic outlay, we mix transparent base, which with the Pearl X pigment powder and the ultraviolet pigment powder. I'm going to do that in a minute and show you how it's done. And then we apply that to the stamp and stamp it directly to the Teslin material with the pre-printed ID face on it. So now I'm going to go through the process. If you want to turn the house lights on for a minute. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible. Thank you. So what I do is I take a shiny surface. First of all, I have my pre-printed template out. Now, in the guide, it explains exactly how I print my template. What I start out is I have 8 cards on this single sheet, and on the back, I have the back pre-printed as well. And the back of the card has like our mission statement and like the website of our club. There's also room on the back so we can use this material here. Now, this material is actually magnetic stripe that's pre-embedded into the laminate, and this can be bought at brainstormidsupply.com as well. And I have it so when it's all lined up, it'll look like this, and when it's die cut out afterwards, it'll come out perfectly. So when you're making your own template, you have to like take all this stuff into consideration. And it'll take many hours of printing and reconfiguring, but if you can manage to do it and it all comes out well, you'll be very happy. So what I'm going to do is I get a shiny surface. I usually use a piece of aluminum foil, but I'm going to use this piece of $10 laminate instead because I don't have any aluminum foil. This kind of looks like drugs, but it's actually UV pigment powder. Empty like a, I don't know if you can see that. There's a little, like a 1/8 of a gram out on the. Okay, this is the Pearl-X pigment powder. It's very shiny stuff. It gets all over your hands and in your lungs. So I recommend wearing a respirator when you do all this, actually flying everywhere because the air is very active on the stage here. Empty a little bit on the table there as well. Now I take some of the, it's called glazing medium. Really all you need is a transparent base, acrylic, water base, any type of material. You might have to experiment around with that. It looks like I've never opened this before, sorry. And I'm going to drop like 1, 2, 3, I don't know, a whole bunch on the table. And I take my finger, this is gonna get messy, and I mix it up, like I do this pretty fast because this stuff will dry fast in the air. And you can only really make like 3 holograms before this stuff dries. And I spread it out ultra, ultra thin. Now, the main problem that new hologram makers do is they don't spread it out thin enough, and they get like huge globs of holograms on their new IDs, and it doesn't look very authentic at all. So I'm going to take this stamp right here. It says Locksport International across in letters all the way across, and we'll see that in a minute. And I stamp the sheet very lightly, and I apply it to the card that I want to apply the hologram to. Okay? Now, it's very, very light, and when you apply the laminate, you can see it better. Now, if you turn the house lights off, I can show you. Now, can I turn the, well, does this light turn off? No? Can you see it? Well, I mean, it's like goes all the way around. Okay, let me try. That didn't come out as good as I wanted to, so let me try one more time. See, it's already beginning to dry. It's probably no way, huh? Thank you. We can see this is the UV pigment powder. It lights up real well with the black light. And then if I find my driver's license and my membership card, I can show you. Here we go. So there's my membership card I made earlier, and you can see it lights up very well, right? And this is my Texas driver's license, which doesn't perform nearly as well as mine. But if you go to the airport and they, the first thing they do is they put your driver's license under the black light. And they've all been trained to tell, black light security features above all else. And black light, UV light security features are usually the easiest to reproduce, unfortunately. So I have these stamps, and these stamps I obtained from simonstamp.com, and they're in Canada, which is probably the reason why I was able to obtain them. when I try to obtain stamps from other sources, they, like in the U.S., I got messages back that said, well, these represent U.S. hologram images from various states. We're not going to be able to we're not going to be able to make these stamps for you.
What was the name of the site?
Simon's. It's in the guide, but it's called simonstamps.com or simonstamp.com, and they let you produce all types of graphic images and things like that. So the next step in the process would be to place your laminate on the identification card template sheet that you already produced. You have your hologram produced on every single identification card. And then you have your back laminate, like we showed here, which I have, I'm using MagStripe, so I can add that extra security feature. Then I would use this piece of, and I have all the outlines for the sizes and thicknesses of laminates that I use, and I have a piece of other laminate that I put on top. And then I'd put this through the laminator and let it dry for a few minutes. And then the next step would be to cut it out on the actual die cutter. You can buy several different types of die cutters on the internet with different sizes, depending on your application. The die cutter I chose to bring today is much bigger than any U.S. driver's license. Not to confuse, what my intentions were. That's why I made a bigger one. So the die cutter is like a $500 piece of equipment, but it weighs about 40 pounds. It's maybe like 30 pounds. It's like pretty heavy. It's pretty awesome. And it's really satisfying. You pull down this lever and it like crinkles through the Teslin and the laminate. And it's like really a good feeling. And I'm going to cut out an identification card from a pre-laminated set of IDs that I have here and show you how that's done. So we can have the house lights back.
Can you make those magnetic stripes readable?
Yes, the magnetic stripes will read. They are fully writable on 3 different tracks with the proper equipment. Well, hypothetically, you could take your real driver's license and copy it over to your identification card and use that as a membership card. So there we go. All right, let's see if I can do this backwards. So I have this is a laminated, pre-laminated. I put it in. I usually do it from the back because it's easier to see. But now I can't see anything, so. And I line everything up by sight. And it took me like 6 months to get really good at this. But now I can do like 100 cards in like 10 minutes. I want everybody to hear this. All right. All right, so that's you can see the Locksport logo that runs across the side. And in the back is the perfectly aligned mag stripe along with our membership creed. And this will go directly into a mag stripe encoder. Some other things I just want to touch on are, this is a piece of Photo Easy. Well, you can't see it. This is a piece of Photo Easy. It's just for making screens. It's another way of making holograms. And you use the transparency. It says Alps Printer International. You put it out in the sun, and you can apply a transparent like screening material and mix the Pearl X and UV powder in there and just rub it on the entire printer template. Okay, I think that's it for the demonstration for now. So this is a picture of Photoshop. Oh, what? Oh. Thanks. This is a picture of what the template looks like before it prints on Photoshop, and you can see how I have like the guides and the lines that help me line up each already made template file on the computer before it prints. This is just something I want to touch on. It's called the Alps Printer, and this is how you make really high quality, professional looking identification card image holograms. And what you do is you spread out an even layer of Pearl X powder onto a piece of laminate, onto the, there's two sides of the laminate. There's a side of the laminate that has the, what's it called? Adhesive, thank you. There's the side that has the adhesive on it, and you put an even layer of Pearl X powder on the adhesive side and put it in this printer. And the printer, what it does is it seals in the Pearl X powder in the areas that you want the hologram in only, and then you take the laminate out of the printer and you wash off the excess Pearl X, and what you'll have left is a perfect hologram. And this printer, they don't make them anymore. You can find them on eBay for about $800, and usually they come and they don't work, and you'll have to buy a new one, and that one will come and it won't work, and then you'll sell it back on eBay, and then it's a terrible process. All right, I'm gonna wrap it up here. So some futuristic concepts and designs. We have PVC is being replaced by Teslin, which is the polythene we talked about. Holograms are being replaced by henograms, which are like much more high-tech holograms. We have like several different images in one hologram, and some of you see them on like the back of phone batteries and stuff like that. 1D being replaced by 2D or 3D. Not sure what it is. Single color UV is being replaced by full color UV. And like what I showed you was a single color UV, but if you have a printer that you can replace the ink in the print cartridges and you can get several different types of UV pigment powder, you can mix your own ink together and re-inject the ink into the printer cartridge and have a full color UV printer. And you can print directly onto the Teslin with this type of printer. And refilling ink cartridges is something that many of you probably explored with. So you can reproduce this pretty easily. There's Gullichin iris print, which are Gullichin security lines. They make the geometry really unique, and when you try to scan these images, it usually comes out pretty bad. And then iris print is when the colors gradually change in a way that is impossible to reproduce on normal like residential printers. Some other pretty cool stuff is hidden images that are only available with decoding lenses that are available only to like government agencies and things like that. And you see on the left there's the picture of the black image, but with the decoding lens it turns red and has a special design. Optically variable ink, which is similar to the Pearl X material, and it changes colors with angles. There's infrared ink, which is nothing new. All right, so if you have a credit card, you can take it out and see it's probably a different color. The magnetic stripe's something other than black. It probably has something printed on, like Ultra Secure or like American Express or something. And it's like, like the blue American Express cards that have a blue magnetic stripe. and they can print their logos and stuff on there. And then there's microtext, which also isn't new, but is also extremely hard to replicate. So then there's probably the single coolest thing that I've ever discovered in the ID industry. When I was discovering this technology, I was talking to someone in the industry, and I was telling him the reason why it said team leader on the first page is because when I was calling people and talking with people, I said, my name's Doug, I'm from the University of Texas, I'm doing a project, we're doing an independent study group on identification card security. He said, oh yeah, you're getting funding from the university? I said, yeah, kinda, And he said, well, what I do is I fraudulently make ID cards for the government and test them out. I have like the license to kill for the ID industry, kind of. I said, that's like the coolest thing I've ever heard. Do you take internships? So we talked for like an hour, and he's telling me about laser engraving, and then he starts, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But he starts to tell me, he's like, so how do they make fake IDs in Texas? And I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about that. And he says, oh, come on, you probably have friends and stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe. He's like, and he starts telling me, well, you know what I do. And I'm like, well, what do you do? He's like, well, he starts telling me about how he takes the laminate off the identification card and he replaces the picture and he changes the birth date. This is a pretty common method. A lot of people know how to do this. But it's something that I've always had trouble with thinking about. Trouble thinking about. And he starts telling me, he's like, well, if you go to Walmart and get the special solvents on the shelf and you let the card sit on the shelf, and he tells me the name of the solvent. It begins with an M, I can't remember. What'd you say? That is methyl ethyl ketone. Yeah, methyl ethyl ketone. Okay, that sounds very familiar.
Well, some auto parts stores might have it as well.
Okay.
Custom carbate things.
Right, that sounds about right.
A little nasty, but I can see it working.
And he lets the ID sit in there for a while, and he's telling me all this stuff, and I'm like writing it all down. I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. And he's telling me, but the secret to the whole part, I'm like, is the paint is the glue that I use to put the adhesive back on, the laminate after I changed everything. So it adheres the laminate back to the Teslin afterwards. And I'm like, no, dude, you already told me the secret. I know how to put the laminate back on the ID. And then there's like a pause, and he's like, wait a minute, I shouldn't be telling you any of this.
Incidentally, if you look into that project, it may be abbreviated MEK. You'll just find that in mind.
Thank you. So there's like a pause, and he's like, were you speaking again? And at this point, I was speaking at DEF CON only. I wasn't approved to speak here yet. And he said, that sounds like one of those hardcore political activist conferences. And I said, yeah, that sounds about right. He said, I have to go. And I said, thanks for your time. Anyways, so this guy that I talked to, he represents this company, and they do laser engraving. It's something called polycarbonate laser engraving. It's only licensed for government use, and it involves, it's kind of like CD burning in a way that it comes down and it like engraves into 3 different layers on the polycarbonate material, and it's totally tamper-proof. It's the future of identification card security, and it's extremely high resolution. And like in the previous slide, it has a GPS self-destruct system, meaning that if it's taken away from the place that it was registered from within like 20 meters, the circuits will fry and the laser will self-destruct, which is pretty awesome. It's only government organizations and only top-level government organizations. Your local DPS office cannot have it. It has to be state level. It has to be, armed guards. It can only be open. There's all these lists that the government, lays out. All of them. I asked him if I could have a copy of some of the polycarbonate. He said, well, we keep those in only 2 different safes around the world, and one of them is not in the United States. So I'd have to get some approval from the university or something. I said, okay, I can set that up. And this is the last slide. It's what a futuristic identification card hopefully will look like if they redo the provisions in the Real ID Act. We have a magnetic stripe, a kenogram, a 3D barcode or 2D barcode, laser engraving, full color UV imaging. We have black and white graphics and full color graphics, and polycarbonate, which I have some polycarbonate material which is not used for making laser engraving, but I do have some polycarbonate material. It costs like $15 or $20 per sheet. So it's what the government considers the most tamper-proof material. And in conclusion, we have ID cards been around about 100 years. We have valid reasons to want to deploy them. There are increased concerns in illegal immigration. You can become involved in the ID security industry at home, and of course, all ID cards have strengths and weaknesses, but hopefully emerging technologies will deliver a robust identification system if implemented correctly. So, thank you.
Hello? We're over, so we don't really have time for questions. So if you just want to approach Doug, that should work just fine.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. This is really cool. Just a reminder, if everybody leaves one water bottle or one plastic cup on the ground, it kind of looks like crap by the end of the day.